In today's video, we respond to one of our subscribers who made a comment, "Can you prove to me that God exists by providing evidence that is testable and verifiable for the supernatural?" So in today's video, we address how do we prove the existence of God. Hey there, my friend, welcome to today's episode of Why I Believe. My name is Calvin, and this series is being launched because this is a reaction, a response to a need that we believe exists in the Christian community where far too many Christians simply don't know why they believe in God. And many Christians believe in God simply because they grew up in the Christian denomination, Christian religion, and the various Christian denominations, and they were simply told to believe X, Y, and Z, and they believe it. And many people, especially young people now, those who attend universities, many people are challenged with their faith and they cannot address the question of why they believe. So we want to do this series in order to equip Christians, especially young Christians, especially university-age Christians, with the tools, with the knowledge, with the arguments. And in our world, in Christianity, this is called apologetics, right? So we want to present these apologetics, these arguments in favor of the existence of God. And I shot this video today because couple of years ago, I did a video, a much longer video. It was like over 2 hours long. So I don't feel right in sharing this because not many people are going to sit for a 2 hour presentation. But I broke down 12 reasons, right? 12 or 14 reasons why we can believe in a God just using the evidence which exists. So what are the evidences for the existence of God? And this video today is a response to a comment we got on one of our videos, and I want to share that comment with you. So let's go to our YouTube channel. During our dive series, we did a video called "Why Don't I Care About God?" And the basic premise was that many people do not care about God because they don't know or understand that there is a God who cares about them. So if people were finally made aware of, if people realized that God exists and God cares about them, then that would evoke a reaction that would lead them to caring about God. So if I understand you care about me, then guess what? I'm going to learn about you and care about you. That was the basic idea. And then one of our subscribers, which I love and I really appreciate that we got the comment, he made this comment. He said, "I think most people that don't care about a God are people that use their critical thinking skills to come to the conclusion that there is no real evidence for any God or anything supernatural. Religion is faith-based, not evidence-based." With respect, John. So here is John, and this is a common sentiment. This is the idea, the prevailing idea out there today is that religion is simply faith-based and there's no evidence to support it, right? And he uses the word critical thinking. Very important. And I found this fascinating. So, me being me, I love apologetics. I love discussing religion. I love discussing faith and science. I love understanding the universe and how it works. So I responded. I said, "Thanks for your thoughts and feedback, John. We appreciate it. Agree that religion is faith-based and so is science, which provides explanation for the origin of the universe." So in other words, I'm saying, hey, yes, religion is faith-based, but science, which tries to explain the origin of the universe, is what? Faith-based as well. And I don't think John quite got it, but let's continue. "Both systems of thought are not provable using the scientific method. Science can't prove the Big Bang and the singularity, but can only offer a hypothesis, which is the exact same thing religion does." So if you don't know what the singularity is, the singularity is basically this concept in science which says that the Big Bang, which is what caused the universe to exist according to science, the singularity was what existed before the Big Bang. And the singularity is this single point of density or denseness, like this, whatever it was, inorganic matter that just exploded. So prior to the Big Bang, according to science, we had something called a singularity, and bang, it exploded and it caused the Big Bang, which is basically what we have today in terms of the universe. And the universe keeps on expanding according to science, right? So I told John, I said, "Hey, John, so The science cannot explain the singularity. Where did that single point of density come from? Science has no explanation, in other words. So here's what John says. John says, religion is faith. Science is the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories against the evidence obtained. Tell me how that has anything to do with faith, because you lost me there, my friend. Okay, so John is taking the argument back to natural science, right? Where this is something you can observe in nature, you can observe over time, you can put on an experiment in a laboratory, and then you can see the results of it. You can test it, you can do different. So this is the science that is common practice that we know today, that creates medicines, for example, that deals with vaccines, that deals with observable things, right? Which is the point that he's making. So he's relating science to the natural. But here is and that is the exact point I was trying to make to him, that science is restricted to the natural, and God and faith and religion, and even the bigger question that science is trying to answer, which is, how did we get there? The origin of the universe is beyond the realm of natural science. I hope you're getting this. Natural science, science as we know it, cannot explain the origin of the universe. And that is what I'm trying to get John back to. I'm trying to get him to that point, because science gives an explanation, but it is not scientific. It is faith. That is key. All right, so I responded to him, and I'm trying to get him back to that point, right? He's trying to run away from it, but I'm trying to get him back to this very point we're talking about, because we're talking about, our show is about God. It's about the supernatural, and science is restricted to the realm of the natural. All right, so let's get back to my response. And I asked him, I said, how does science explain the creation of the universe, aka the Big Bang Theory? Is that observable or tested through experimentation? What are your views on how life originated in the universe? And I said, by the way, I would love to get on a Zoom call to discuss and share if you're inclined to do so, because I want to take this conversation off of YouTube and onto a one-on-one discussion in Zoom, whatever platform he feels comfortable. And then later on, you'll see that he actually declined. But let's continue reading. He says, no, but I would love to ask you a question, my friend. Can you provide me with any good, testable, verifiable evidence for any God or anything supernatural? All right. So he says, okay, yes, I concede that science is limited and it's restricted, right? This is, in my mind, he's conceding. He's saying, okay, yes, science cannot explain the supernatural, but can you prove it as well? So he's putting the ball back in my court, and he's saying, can you prove the supernatural? And in this video, friends, I want to prove the supernatural. I want to prove to you that the reason why we believe is based on evidence. It's based on reason. It's not blind faith. So in today's presentation, my friend, and I'm getting pumped up because I love this stuff. In today's presentation, I'm going to condense this 2-hour video that I did, and we're going to condense it to a 10 to 20-minute presentation to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the argument for religion and Christianity is the best argument that exists in the world today. Again, this is called apologetics, but we're doing this in a non-conventional manner, and we want to equip the saints. We want to equip you, especially our young adults, especially those attending university, with the knowledge and the arguments. And here is why this is important. Before we get into the presentation, I want to share with you my personal journey, friends. I was once that person that was agnostic, and I didn't believe. I grew up Roman Catholic. After a while of reading, studying, going through my A-levels, community college, and I just read a lot. And I was like, why is there so much confusion? Why are there so many religions? If there is a God, I want to be able to prove it. Not because I was just told that there is God and I just need to accept it and shut up and accept it. No. Why? So I started this journey, my friends. I started this journey of studying. And what I did was I found all of the materials on evolution, creation, and I compared. Of course, I was starting from the point that I was a Christian initially, but I compared. I said, okay, what are the arguments that atheists have, right? What are the very best arguments? And I studied and I studied. And in my study, what I came to realize is, yes, there is a God, right? The best arguments that exist in this world point to the fact that there is a creator. It's the only logical conclusion. It is the only logical conclusion that there is a creator. And if there is a creator, what religion should I choose? And I'm comparing Islam, I compared Judaism, I compared Christianity, and I studied all of these different religions. And in my study, my conclusion was that there is a creator, and the best religion is Christianity, because in Christianity, there is a God of love who is different from the other gods of the different religions. And then, since I'm now convinced that Christianity is the right religion, the next logical step is this. What is the best denomination, or what does the Bible teach as truth to point me to the right denomination or the right church? And in my study, friends, I've come to the conclusion that the religion, the denomination that I belong to, is the most biblically sound denomination in all of Christianity, and that is Seventh-day Adventism. Right? Now, you may not be at that point yet, but I'm telling you, one, God does exist. Two, that God which exists is the God of Christianity. And three, if the God that exists is the God of Christianity, then that God wants me to join a denomination that most directly points to him, that contains the most truth, the denomination of the Bible, which is Seventh-day Adventism. And we can prove that in other lessons. But just for today, we want to prove that God exists. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to condense these 12 arguments into a shortened version. And I'm also going to use a presentation that I found really powerful from this ministry called Valid Reasons. As we get into this, here's what I want you to know. Here's what I want you to know. When you're speaking to an atheist or agnostic or someone who does not believe, the simple question is this. One question. Just one question. That's all you need to ask. Here's the question. How did we get here? Where does life come from? Yes, you were born and your parents made you, but who made your parents? And then you go back and look at the beginning of our universe. How did we get here? Let's dive in.
When we're having this conversation about the existence of God, everything has to go back to the beginning of the universe. And the main question is, how did we get here? How did the universe begin? And unless I'm mistaken, we only have two options. Number one, as Lawrence Krauss's best-selling book says, the universe came from nothing. Or number two, as theists put it, the universe was created by something, and they believe that something to be God. So, our two opinions are something versus nothing. Ultimately, none of us can go back in time and physically see what was there or not there before the universe existed. No matter how fancy the animations from movies that show the beginning of time, like this one, ultimately, no one can prove how the universe began, and that's just not my opinion. That's also the opinion of world-famous atheist and physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he said it in this interview with Bill Maher.
Also, we don't know what was around before the Big Bang. That's kind of fun. We have some ideas, maybe a multiverse, and with one of multiple bubbles of universes coming in and out of existence.
When it comes to how the universe came into existence, Tyson readily admits that he doesn't know. If you're being intellectually honest, then at least you should be willing to give both options equal value. Now back to science. The word science is used so casually, and it's used to mean so many different things. So what are we even actually talking about when someone says that science or scientific facts have disproved God? After looking and reading and listening and looking some more, I came up with a list of a few foundational facts that modern science teaches. And today, I want to see if any of these things disprove God. So here's the list. Number one, modern science teaches that the universe had a beginning. Some of us call that time. And I think everyone can agree on that. And if you saw our last video, then you saw how time could actually be used to prove the existence of God. And we'll get back to that in a future video. Numbers 2, 3, and 4. Modern science teaches that the universe is made up of space, matter, and energy. That's just basic science 101 that you would learn in any 5th grade science class. Number 5. Modern science teaches that life comes from life, a little thing that scientists call biogenesis, as everything that's alive has come from something else that's alive. Also in this interview with Bill Maher, physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson and Richard Dawkins had this to say about the origins of life.
What is currently the most exciting area of scientific development?
The origin of life is something we don't know anything about, and we want to know something about it. And I would love to know how life actually got started, the origin of the first self-replicating entity.
I'm not a biologist, and that's my top three things as well. Just how do you go from organic molecules to self-replicating life? That happened in the early Earth, and it happened relatively quickly. Very shortly after it could have possibly happened, it happened.
Essentially, he's saying that even though he believes that life began from non-life, he has no idea how it happened, and he hopes that we will find out at some future time. And Richard Dawkins said the exact same thing when asked about the origin of life. As of right now in 2023, it has never been shown that life can come from non-life. Therefore, biogenesis is still the reigning scientific fact. Number 6, modern science teaches that because of genetics, one type of organism will always produce the same type of organism, which means that cats have cats, dogs have dogs, and humans have humans, meaning that there is no observable evidence that one kind of animal or one kind of organism can turn into another kind of organism. And finally, number 7, the science of the mind, also known as psychology, teaches that humans are different from animals because we have a higher level of consciousness, because we have the ability to choose between right and wrong, whatever right or wrong is, and we'll also get to that in a future video. Let's start with the origin of the universe. Starting with Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "In the beginning." So, the Bible teaches that the universe had a beginning. That's time. God created the heavens, that's space, and the earth, that's matter. Genesis 1, verse 3, God said, "Let there be light," that's energy. Genesis chapter 1, verses 11, 12, 21, 24, and 25. "Let the trees, grass, birds, fish, and mammals bring forth after their kind." That sounds like genetics to me. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. In other words, the claim from the Bible is that God was alive and he gave life to another life. Get it? Life comes from life. Remember, that's biogenesis. And again, Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. Man became a living soul, different from the animals. In other words, a higher level of consciousness. All of this right there in literally the first 35 verses of the Bible, with these scientific ideas written 3,500 years before anything that we call modern. Now for another disclaimer. I'm not saying that this proves the Judeo-Christian God is the right choice, but I think that the fact of the matter is that this account of the origin of the universe and life is in line with the proven scientific facts, which is that the universe did indeed have a beginning. The universe is made up of space, matter, and energy. Because of genetics, living things replicate after their kinds. Biogenesis, or the fact that life always comes from life, is also represented. And finally, the fact that humans have a higher level of consciousness is also presented. So now I have a question for you. Do you see that these specific points about what modern science teaches is in line with what is found in Genesis chapter 1 and 2?
First of all, we need to define our terms, right? Before you go into any type of study, especially when it comes to religion, spirituality, God, the universe, all of these complicated topics, we first need to define our terms. So what is God? This is my definition of God, right? I believe that God is a being, a supernatural being who exists outside of time, right? And outside of time, we call that eternity or infinity. God is infinite, right? God is not defined by time. God exists outside of time and space. Now, it's important that I say that from the beginning because later on in the study, when we look at science and all of the other reasons, time and space will come up again. Very important. We lay the foundation. God exists outside of time and space. So God is not dependent upon time and space. You and I are because we're finite beings, but God is infinite. God is beyond that, right? God, secondly, is uncaused. What does that mean? For something to be caused, right, it has to have something acting upon it, right, or greater power acting upon it to cause it. Because God, as the Christians would call it, is omnipotent, all-powerful, he cannot be caused. So God is the first cause, right? And we call that being uncaused. That's what God is. So if something else created God, that thing would be God, and God would not be God. God has to be the first cause. No beginning, no end. God was not caused by anything else. He is the first cause. So that means there is nothing greater than God. All right. Also, God is not dependent, right? Like we said, God is all-powerful, omnipotent. God does not depend on anything else to be God or to be sustained. Like his life is self-derived. His being, his state of being, his existence is self-derived, uncaused, that is infinite, that is relational. And this is very important, right? So relational is important because a lot of people disagree when it comes to this topic, this idea of a relational being, meaning that as a Christian, as a believer, I believe that God is a relational being. Relation meaning that God has a relationship with other beings. Here's what I mean. Before God created the universe, right? Before God created angels or heaven or human beings, before God created the universe, if God said, I love, how could God love when there is nothing to love? Just think about this. Just pause. Think about it. How could God say that he loves or that he speaks or communicates if there is nothing to love? So, what am I saying? I'm saying that before the creation of the universe, God within himself, in the being that is God, right? There's a dynamic there where God has someone or something else to love, and we call that the Godhead. So when God says I love, he loves his son, Jesus. There's the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. So I believe that love only exists in relationship. When God loves, he shows affection. He shows that affection to another being, which is another being of the Godhead. So God being God all by himself does not depend on the creation to love. So that is important. In Christianity, we believe that love precedes life as we know it. So before there was a creation, there was love. The Bible says that God is love, right? So for God to be loved, that means that love has to exist before God created anything else. Now, I'm saying all of this because it's important that we understand the nature of that God. So that God is not impersonal, is not detached, he's not aloof. He doesn't just create the universe, set up laws, and just put it in motion and that's it. No, I believe that the God that we serve, the God that we believe in, is a personal God, right? A relational God who has emotions, feelings, all of that stuff. Because again, we're created in God's image. And then we'll go into the reasons why, but I just wanted to establish this is my base. This is the fundamentals of what I believe to be God. Here's how the religious argument goes, right? If you take a pool or sample of 100 people, say 1,000 people, 1,000,000 people, what you'll find is that in the human experience, human beings as a whole, 95%, some say even higher, 95 to 98% of human beings believe in a higher power. There's a propensity to believe. We have a bias as human beings to believe. Now, scientists and atheists argue, well, we are programmed that way from our upbringing, just from culture, from society, and we're programmed. But it doesn't change the fact that as a human being, 95 to 98% of us have a propensity to believe. We are designed, I believe, to believe, right? Again, science will say, well, evolution has made us in that way. So this is what's called a universal religious impulse. Why do you go across the entire world, in every continent, in every country, in every little village, wherever it is, sophisticated, not sophisticated, you find that human beings, as long as they exist in a society, in a culture, there's a religion. That is called the universal religious impulse. And I believe that this is built into humanity. And science cannot explain this state of being as a human being. Science can simply tell us that it exists, but it cannot explain why it exists from inception. Existentialism is a kind of a big word. And like I said, I wanted to try to avoid the jargons, but essentially it deals with the idea of why do we exist, right? What is our purpose? And when you look at existentialism, that is a non-scientific argument. It's non-scientific questions. For example, I just want you to think of this example, right? I want to break it down. you're born, right? You're alive, your eyes are open now, you're conscious, and then you're awake, and all of a sudden you just and like you land up in some land in North America or wherever in the world, and then you open up your eyes and you start looking around. What we find and what science and intellectuals all over the world have found is inevitably what happens is that human beings, by the very nature of existing, right? I think, therefore I am, but by the very nature of existing, by being awake, by being conscious, we start to ask questions. The human mind is naturally curious. So, for example, what even you can look at a child, a baby coming up, and a child starts asking the questions. Here's what a human being is going to ask: why is there a universe? Right? Why do I exist? Why is there a universe? And if there is a universe, what is our purpose? And why are we in the universe? And lastly, what happens next? What happens after we die? Right? So I'm presenting these questions, and this is a whole existentialism argument, is that those questions exist outside of the realms of science, because science explains the material world, whereas these questions are immaterial in nature. In other words, science cannot explain purpose. In fact, if you're a die-hard scientist, if you're an agnostic or an atheist, you have to admit that according to science, there is no purpose. Moving on to the time argument, right? So the time argument is simple, and I'm not going to spend so much time on this. So the time argument, it goes like this, that there is a knowledge of the past and the present, which is natural, but the knowledge of the future is supernatural. For example, if I ask you right now and I say, hey, who is the president of the United States? And right now I'm doing this video and it's in 2023. Who is the president of the United States right now, right? Simple question, simple answer. And the answer is Joe Biden, right? But then I ask you again, I say, hey, who was the president of the United States 4 years ago? Again, simple answer, Donald Trump, right? So you and I, as natural beings, we have a knowledge of the present, which is the now, and also the past. So that is within our sphere of knowing. That doesn't take any supernatural power. But if I ask you, who is the president of the United States in the year 25500, which is 500 years from now, you have no idea, you have no clue, because that requires a knowledge of the future, right? So a knowledge of the present or knowledge of the past does not require supernatural knowledge. It's natural. That is why you and I can know it. But a knowledge of the future is supernatural. So the God of the Bible, the God of Christianity, the God of all religions has a claim, right? For example, in the Bible, in Isaiah chapter 41, verses 21 to 23, God of the Bible says, bring all of the other gods and have them predict the future. And the God of the Bible is making that claim and saying, hey, all of these other gods are false because they cannot predict the future, and only I can. And if I can predict the future, that proves that I am God and I am supernatural. I am beyond time and space, right? So God claims he exists outside of time and he inhabits eternity, right? So the Bible says in Revelation chapter 1, verse 8, that God exists in the past, the present, and the future at the very same time. And it also says that in Isaiah chapter 57, verse 16. In other words, what am I saying? I'm saying that the time argument is a proof that the God that we serve, that we claim to serve, is the true God, because that God claims that he can tell us the future before it happens. Now you may say, well, yeah, anybody can claim that, but can you prove it? Yes, I believe we can. And this is the next argument, the prophecy argument. Like I said, this is Bible-based. Now, if you're a Bible student, right, and you go into the books of Daniel chapter 8 and Daniel chapter 9, in fact, Daniel chapter 2, and you just look at the time prophecies in the Bible, and you look at the prophecies in the Bible which have come to pass and have been fulfilled, this is where I want you to do your research. If you don't believe in a God, all you need to do is to study the books of Daniel and Revelation and look at the time prophecies in the Bible and see how God gave men visions way before these events happened, and they happened hundreds, in some cases, thousands of years after these men lived. Again, that is God proving that He can tell us the future because He is supernatural. He exists outside of time and space, and that is not possible for a human being to do. Okay? Now, like I said, for the sake of time, I can't go into every single argument and delve it up, but this is one of the strongest reasons why I believe in a higher power, because of prophecy. All right? And I believe that the Bible has many examples of prophecies being fulfilled, that God demonstrating His divine power, His supernatural power. Now, the next argument is a science argument. I'm going to spend a little bit more time here because perhaps the biggest reasons why people don't believe in the Bible or they don't believe in God anymore is because of science. And I'm going to caveat that by saying that this is not true science. This is science so falsely called science. False science. Or another word for it that we look at today is natural science. But modern science claims that the universe had a beginning and did not always exist. So just take it, like I said, I'm a big believer in history. A few hundred years ago, scientists believed in a theory called the steady state universe, meaning that they believed that the universe always existed. The universe always existed, right? It had no beginning, had no end. Relatively recently, science and scientists now believe that the universe had a beginning. Now, if you know those terms, the Big Bang Theory. So the Big Bang Theory is, the popular term that we use to describe how the universe began. And then if you gotta kind of go back in terms of what started the Big Bang, science claims that there was a single point of density or denseness. I think in some circles it's called a singularity, where there is a sudden explosion of light, which then created the laws of nature, right? In fact, let me circle that back. Science believes that what caused the Big Bang was a set of forces, right? Of forces, and these forces were not physical, right? Number one, they were not physical. Number two, they act upon the physical, right? These forces also, number three, created the physical from nothing, and also they predate the universe. So if you just look at that definition of what these forces are, right? Like I said, science tells us that according to the theory of the Big Bang and quantum fluctuation, which explains the beginning of the universe, that the universe exploded into life and came into being from nothing, right? So science says that the universe did not always exist, but the universe started at a point in time, or even if you can call it time, because there was no, right? There was no time. It just started out of nothing. So there was nothing, and then all of a sudden you have an explosion, and now you have something. So the universe came from nothing. But for that to happen, there had to be laws of nature or forces which then set things in motion and caused the Big Bang. And these forces had to predate the universe, had to exist before the universe began. And get this, these forces had to act upon the physical, right? It had to not be physical. Does that sound familiar? These forces, guys, if you just look at the terms, not be physical, act upon the physical, create the physical from nothing, predates the universe. These forces that science claim created the universe out of nothing and started the Big Bang. These forces sound a lot like what we as believers and Christians call God. I hope that makes sense. Science is one of the strongest arguments right now which confirm a belief in a higher power and a God, because the best scientific knowledge that we have today tell us that a set of forces created the universe out of nothing, and these forces are not physical and predates the universe. Basically, science is confirming that there is a being who exists, or a set of being or forces which existed beyond and outside space and time. I hope I'm making sense, and I hope I'm not just being too repetitious. Guys, what I'm saying is that science is one of the strongest arguments in favor of a God. All right? A second argument, which again we can use science to prove that there is a God, is this theory called the fine-tuned universe theory. Basically, what this is that it tells us that the laws and constants of nature are fine-tuned for the existence of human life on Earth. So all you have to do to understand this theory and to put it into context better is to look at the other planets in the solar system, right? Just in our galaxy, in our Milky Way. Look at the other planets. Look at Jupiter, Mars, all of these other planets. When compared to Earth, we find that there are conditions on Earth which are fine-tuned, perfectly created or designed or made to sustain life on Earth, whereas on the other planets, that is not the case. So the fine-tuned universe theory helps support the idea that there is a God who made things, the conditions in such a way to sustain life here on this planet and in our universe, right? Science, which I think like I want to call natural science, does not contradict the existence of God. It demonstrates God's existence. Science shows us how, but it doesn't explain why, right? For example, if you walk into a room and you see me take a kettle and I put it on a stove, right, to make a cup of tea, what science will do, friends, is science is going to explain to you the particles which start to boil and the heat and the condensation and all of these other reasons of how the water comes to a boil. It can explain the how of what's happening, but science could never explain the why. Why did I take the kettle and put it on top of the stove to make a cup of tea? Science cannot give you the motive. It cannot give you the underlying why. It can only explain the process of what's happening, which is the how. And that is what we use science for, right? Anyone who tries to use science to explain the why of the universe is missing the point, because you cannot observe a why. You can only observe a how. Moving on to the morality argument, right? So I'm trying to speed for this, guys, but like I said, each of these slides can be, fleshed out and, exhausted in and of itself, but we want to kind of summarize things. So morality. Here's a morality argument. Question for you. Does good exist? Okay. You might have some challenges down. It's like, yeah, of course, good. What do you mean? And be more specific. Does evil exist? What do I mean by that? If you walk into a room and then you see me take a baby, right? And I take that baby by the legs and I just like slam the baby and all the brains get shut out. I'm sorry to be so graphic, but what I'm saying is that we know that evil exists. There are certain things that you know to be wrong, right? Evil exists. No denying that, right? Hitler killing millions of Jews. Evil exists in this world. Yes, it does, right? By virtue of the fact that evil exists, the opposite of that also must be true. There must be good, right? If there is evil, there is good. So how do you know? How do you and I know what is evil versus good, right? If evil exists, then there must be good. If there is good, then there is a moral law to differentiate between good and evil. How do I know what is good versus evil? It's because there is a moral law. And friends, if there is a moral law, then that means that there is a moral law giver. And we call that moral law giver God, right? So the whole idea of morality in itself assumes there to be a God. Because how do I know what is good versus evil unless there is a standard? And how do I know there is a standard unless there's someone who gives that standard? That standard has to come from somewhere. Does that make sense? So that is a morality argument. And when it comes to the whole idea of suffering in the universe, that is one of the biggest reasons why I believe people turn away from God, because they're like, if God is so good and God exists, why doesn't God stop this rapist from raping that child or from killing this person or this suicide bomber? Here's the argument, guys. If God stops the suicide bomber from bombing people, or the guy who's about to kill, do a mass shooting and kill hundreds of people. If God prevents his ability to pull that trigger, what is God doing? Essentially, God is taking away freedom of choice. You cannot have love where there is no choice. So remember, we started with this whole argument of what is God, and then we looked at the religious argument and we said that God is love. For there to be love in the universe, there has to be free will, there has to be freedom of choice. And if God were to take away our choice, then we will become robots. We're forced to do what God says. And love cannot exist where there is no choice. All right? So that is the reason why I believe there is suffering in the world, just because of that freedom of choice that God has given us. And we know some people use that choice for good, some for evil. Okay? A lot more can be said on that topic, but I think this represents a good summary. Okay, so this argument, again, kind of stemming from the whole scientific argument and this idea of biogenesis and origins. And I think it's important that we explain what that is, because, like we said, science explains the how, but not the why. Biogenesis is simply the idea that all life comes from other life. In nature, all life comes from other life. It has never been proven, it's never been seen, it's never been demonstrated. Although there are theories, it's never been proven that life can come from something else other than life. In other words, for there to be life, there has to be pre-existing life. Let that sink in. For there to be life, there has to be pre-existing life. So for the universe to have existed, for the universe to come into being, the assumption is, and that's a very important assumption, according to the law of biogenesis, that there has to be pre-existing life. Okay, so you say, okay, what about then the theory of evolution, Darwin's theory of evolution, right? So Darwin's theory does not explain the origins of life, but explains the transition of life forms with pre-existing conditions, such as the existence of life. So what is that saying? That simply means that Darwin's theory explains how life evolved or transitioned from one organism to another. It doesn't explain how life started in the first place. Okay, so what we're saying is that life comes from other life, and that is what biogenesis means. So the whole notion and the idea that life or the universe came from nothing, right? Something coming out of nothing, defies the law of biogenesis. It doesn't make sense, right? And I believe that no one can literally prove how the universe began. It's unprovable, because you would have to be able to reproduce it and test it and all of that kind of stuff. And that is beyond the scientific method, right? We have to rely on some sort of faith or belief, because we cannot prove it. Okay. All right. So this argument, for the sake of time, I'm going to run for this one. This is the whole idea of the complexity of nature. So when we look at nature, we look at things that exist all around us. Look at a tree. We look at the human body, for example. What do we see? We see design. There's design in nature, and basically we can call this like intelligent design, right? So for example, if you walk into a desert, right, or you walk into a forest, and all of a sudden a vehicle, a car, just falls out from the sky and just lands in front of you, and then you start to analyze and study the vehicle and the car, and then you see tires, you see a steering wheel, you see purpose, you see intent, you see design. The very fact that you see design in that car tells you that there is a designer. And because the car is a product, is the effect, the cause, what created the car has to be greater than the effect, right? So basically, what am I saying? I'm saying that the creation has to be inferior or less than the creator. The thing that caused the creation to come into existence, the thing that caused us, has to be greater than the effect. God, who is the cause, has to be greater than the effect. The computers, for example, develop their own artificial intelligence. Any rational, sensible person will say, no, there has to be a programmer who designed the software and designed the artificial intelligence initially. right? All that to say that the first cause, who is God, has to be greater than the effect, right? So for a human being to say, I am God, is foolish, because God meaning that God means that you are uncaused. And the very fact that you are finite and that you can die one day and there are things greater than you, that means that you are not God. Because God is the greatest. There is no greater than God himself. So a human being, you and I cannot be God, because we were caused. And God is without cause, without beginning, without end. And like you know, one day we die, right? And only, I believe, the gift of eternal life comes as a result of receiving that gift in a love relationship with God, our Creator, right? I believe it's a reward. We don't inherently have immortality. Only God does that. All right. All right. So let's move on to psychology. Psychology is a very interesting argument, right? Because again, this is one of the arguments that science cannot explain. Like we mentioned, science can explain a how of a certain thing, but it cannot explain why. Consciousness, for example, is unexplainable. Consciousness, the very fact that we're sentient, conscious beings, science cannot prove or explain how this came into being. I want you to get this. Science, the best of human knowledge right now, cannot explain how consciousness began. We have theories and we can postulate all we want, but it cannot explain this is how it happened. It cannot prove it. It cannot test it because, again, like we said, there are some things that are not scientific. It goes beyond the realm of science, right? For example, we can think in our mind. We have thoughts, but a thought is not tangible. It's not material. So I'll go into an explanation of what that is. But having a sense of selfhood or self, science cannot explain how this came to be because it is not material or physical in nature. Science explains the natural world, the physical world. But when it comes to things beyond physical, immaterial things, science cannot explain it. Human beings are different from animals because we can choose between right or wrong. Moral choices are not only instincts, right? So this brings in the whole morality argument we kind of touched on already, and how we get morality. But again, that is part of the whole psychology argument that there are things that are non-physical in terms of, for example, thinking and consciousness that science and human beings cannot explain even right now. We cannot explain it. The only explanation, rational explanation, is that it came from a sentient being. It came from a God who was also conscious and said, let us create man in our own image. That is the only rational explanation that we have. Some evolutionists or atheists who don't believe in a God claim, like Richard Dawkins, just look him up on YouTube. Some believe that this consciousness came from aliens out of space who came to this earth and gave it to us. So they rather believe that aliens, some other beings, some intelligent beings outside of our universe came to us and gave us consciousness rather than believing a God who exists and made us that this way. So in this world of psychology, we call this the voice of conscience or the impartial spectator, as Adam Smith called it. We believe that it was implanted in us by God. Science tells us facts, but does not tell us what is right or wrong, which we call morality. Like for example, of a dog feeling pain and whether we should inflict pain upon the animal. So, for example, science can tell us, based on recent discoveries and scientific knowledge has advanced, science can tell us that if you step on a dog's foot, right, apart from the fact that the dog will scream and cry, that this dog literally feels pain. Science can tell us that, right? But as far as whether or not I choose to inflict the pain upon the animal, science cannot tell us whether or not this is right or wrong, because that is an argument outside of the bounds of science. I know I'm saying the same thing over and over again because I want to make sure that we understand this. Our sense of right and wrong, our morality, our psychology, the way we think is not explainable by science. Right? Where does that come from? I believe it comes implanted within us. We're all given this voice of conscience, this inner voice by our Creator because He has it as well, right? All right, so history. I'm gonna start speeding up because this is kind of going way too long. So the historical argument. So why do I mention the history of history? So the history of history simply means that when you look at the world's history, right, all of the evidence that we have now points to the fact that this world is young in nature, right? You have some scientists who use carbon dating and then they use different methods and they tell you the Earth is billions of years old. I can go into many reasons why that's flawed and that's wrong, but modern recorded history, I'm saying modern for a reason, we're not talking about the times where they did the dinosaurs and all of that stuff, but modern recorded history tells us that the Earth is only roughly 6,000 years old, right? The Earth was created 6,000 years ago. One proof of that is if you look at the population of the world, right? The population of the world, you take the 6 billion people that we have on this Earth right now, and you do an extrapolation going backwards. You take the population of the world and you say, okay, if I were to go backwards in time and I try to determine when was the first person, the first human being existed, that takes you roughly to 4,000 to 6,000 years ago, right? Which agrees to the biblical account of the age of the Earth, right? The Bible, according to the Bible, this Earth is not more than 6,000 years old, right? Also, the oldest living records that we have on this planet, when you look at archaeology, we looked at trees, for example, and there are many evidences, and I don't want to go into many specifics because this video is going to take way too long. All of these things point to the fact that this Earth is roughly 4,000 to 6,000 years. Why do I use that as a proof? Because this aligns and agrees with the biblical account, and about the biblical account also tells us that the Earth existed because of a God who created the Earth in 6 literal days, right? The law of entropy. So the law of entropy is the second law of thermodynamics. It's basically a statement which says that that heat always flows spontaneously from hotter to cooler regions of matter or downhill gradient. So for the sake of our argument and why we use this as a proof is because the law of entropy states that systems left unto itself tends to chaos. So in other words, things go from order to disorder, right? What do I mean by that? So if you go into a room, say for example, you wake up in the morning, you clean your room, make your bed, put things in order, then you never go back to that room. And then somehow, somewhere, you live 500 years into the future, 500 years later, and you've never touched that room. What is going to happen to the room? It's going to go from order to disorder. So what we see in nature, in life, in things that we can observe, is that things over time deteriorate. It gets worse. It gets from good to bad. So the law of entropy states that things left by their own tend to disorder, and that is what we see in creation. That is what we see in the world that we can observe all around us, that we believe that there existed a perfect world as God made it, or the universe, and then it got messed up over time. And then what we see now is a result where things are going into chaos, it's going into disorder. Things were better and they've been getting worse over time. And I think this proves the theory and the ideas and the propositions in the Bible that God created this world perfect, the Garden of Eden. And then what we see now is a decay as a result of sin and all of the other reasons that we believe. But that is one of the reasons why I believe that the biblical account is true, because nature in itself tells us this according to the law of entropy. All right, so I'm gonna quickly go for the last one. So this one is a biblical based, right? So the evidence of a worldwide flood, right? The fossil beds, oil as we know it, the whole carbon system, the oil beds and the fossil records tell us that. For example, if you just look at the Grand Canyon, and I'm presenting these ideas because primarily I don't want to just tell you what to think. I want to kind of point you in the right direction and then have you go do your own research. If you look at the Grand Canyon and the explanation as to how the Grand Canyon came, right, in a sudden flood, deluge all over the world, there's evidence, guys. There's evidence that there was a worldwide flood, and then archaeologists today scientists today are uncovering proofs that, for example, the extinction of dinosaurs happened not because of meteors, but because of a flood, a cataclysmic flood, right? So there are evidences all over the world of a worldwide flood. One of the biggest evidence of that is the fossil beds, the oil beds, the fossil fuels that we have right now, and also the the Grand Canyon is a very good example of the rapid change, and there is proof in the different records that we can see that there wasn't evidence. There was a strong case for a worldwide flood, which I believe to be the biblical account of Noah and the flood which destroyed the world. All right. So moving on to the last one is the archaeological argument. So archaeology is one that's really exciting, especially if you love history, because what we're seeing now is many archaeologists are discovering remnants of the past which prove the biblical account of many, many, many stories. And I'll just give you a couple here. And literally for people in history like Jesus, for example, like Moses, like King David, I've heard people say, well, there's no evidence of David. How do you prove it? There is proof. There's actually archaeological evidence that there was a man named David, that the story of David and Goliath was true, for example. And not only historians documented it, but archaeologists also have documented it. Just want to point out that the first historian, according to the records that we have, was Herodotus, who wrote 1300 years after Abraham. And many people say, well, because there's a lack of evidence of something, that means that thing didn't exist, and that's not true, right? In legal terms, we like to say that the lack of evidence is no evidence of lack, right? So because I cannot prove that I don't have evidence for something, doesn't mean that thing didn't exist. All right, it's just that I haven't found the evidence yet. So, for example, in Egypt right now, Egyptologists have found proof of the Exodus narrative, right, in hieroglyphics on Egyptian walls depicting the flood and the Exodus account. So that whole story of the children of Israel live in Egypt, right, and this big flood now destroying the Egyptians and the Pharaoh as they chased after the children of Israel. There are hieroglyphics on the walls of Egypt. These are not Christians that actually depict that exact same story. And these hieroglyphics are being found all over Egypt. Isn't that proof? Isn't that evidence? Right? So again, archaeology is one of the most exciting evidence and proofs that we have now, because more and more is just being dug up all of the time, right? So the 𝗥𝗲𝗃 is an artifact that provides evidence of David and Goliath. Again, I'm giving you these terms and resources so that you can go do your homework and you can research some of these things. Another proof is that the Davidic kings, 20 kings who reigned after David, including Solomon. So when God put David in charge and said, David, you're going to reign, and then your generation and all of that stuff, we know that there are 20 kings who came directly after the line of David in that succession, including his son Solomon. And there are many pieces of pottery and physical evidences that archaeologists are discovering right now, including like signets and rings, which has the names, the exact names that are written in the Bible of those kings, right? For example, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Uzziah. So the same names that are used in the Bible are being found on seals and other pieces of antiquity, right, which archaeologists are digging up with those exact same names of some of those kings who reigned after David. If they reigned after David, doesn't that prove that David also reigned because they're in the succession of David? Just a food for thought. The Moabite stone, or also called the Mesha stele, which you can find in Second Kings chapter 3 in terms of the story around the Moabite stone. This is a stone. On it is written that the house of David is inscribed on that stone. Basically, what the Moabite stone is, this Moabite, this person is claiming that he defeated someone of the house of David. So he's referencing the house of David on the Moabite stone. So this is independent verification. It's not coming from Jerusalem. It's not coming from the children of Israel. It's from the Moabites, right? A competing, a warring nation, referencing the kingdom of David or house of David. Similar to that is the Tel Dan Steel. It mentions the house of David and it dates to the 9th century BC, which is roughly 200 years after David lived, which establishes the historicity of David. So it basically proves that David was a person of history who existed. But also, my last argument is from a biblical account. I believe that everything we need to believe comes from the Bible. We can find it in the Bible, right? In Genesis chapter 1, it says, in the beginning. So this is God creating time, right? Remember, we talk about what is God and time and space and all that stuff, and God exists beyond all of that. God created time. God created the heavens, which is space. God created the earth, which is matter. God said, let there be light, which is energy, right? God created living beings to create after their own kind, which is the whole school of genetics. God said, let them have the breath of life, which is biogenesis. Life comes from life. And also, God made us, human beings, a living soul, which again is a psychological argument, which is consciousness. Where does this come from? All of these things that we explained and showed that science cannot explain, it's still unexplainable in science. In the Bible, God says, I did it. Friends, I hope you found this presentation useful. My belief is that as the world evolves and human knowledge increases and people run to and fro, what I believe is human beings who increase in knowledge, especially in the realm of science, will come to a point where we climb this mountain of knowledge and we reach the ascent and we reach the peak, only to find that there are on that peak, on that top of that mountain, theologians, believers in a higher power, believers in the Most High, sitting on top of the mountain, who believed these things all along simply because God said. And why do we believe it? Because God said it, right? So I believe in a higher power. These are the reasons why I believe in God. If you approach this idea of God and the Bible and you're looking for doubt, you're looking for reasons not to believe, you're skeptical, you don't want to apply any faith towards this whole argument, you're gonna find what you're looking for. If you're looking for doubt, you'll find doubt. Does that make sense? If you're looking for reasons to believe, you'll find reasons to believe because you're open. But if your mind is closed and you're only looking for what's wrong, you'll always find what's wrong because there is something in our brain, the way we're made and designed. And the law of attraction, people have kind of jumped on it. It's called the reticular activating system, the RAS, meaning that whatever we look for is what we tend to see. Right? Whatever we look for, whatever you focus on is what you tend to see. So my encouragement to you as you continue your search is to have an open mind. If you believe in a God, pray for wisdom and discernment. Study these things out, but come with an open mind, not with an existing bias that this is what I want to find, because what you want to find is what you'll find. But I'm open to all truth, all possibility. And I believe that the God of the universe will direct your path. I believe that God has his children in all walks of faith, in all denominations, in all religions, right? And it's not about religion, it's about a spiritual connection with him, a love relationship with him and with our fellow man. That's what it boils down to. Religion doesn't save you, right? Only a love relationship with God does. And only he knows the heart. So I'm not claiming to be more religious or closer to God than anybody else. I'm on that journey as well. But I believe it's important that we come with a sincere, humble heart, seeking and wanting to know what is truth. And God will provide that to us. All right, friends. So thank you so much for your time. I really try to make this condensed, try to eliminate all of the jargon and technical terms. And I really hope that this is a blessing to you. And I really, really, really want to hear your thoughts. So let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. And I look forward to hearing from you and talking to you soon. Bye for now, and God bless.